Hello and welcome to the second of WalesOnline's live events ahead of the election on May 6th. Tonight we're putting your questions to 6 of the people who want to elect you in the Senedd after May 6th. Tonight we're joined by representatives from the Liberal Democrats, which is Cadan ap Tomos, from Glwad, the Welsh Independence Party, Gwyn Wigley Evans, from UKIP, Neil Hamilton, from Reform UK, Jenkins, from Propel, Neil McEvoy, and Amelia Womack from the Green Party. Thanks all for joining us tonight. We did, just for the record, invite a representative from Abolish the Welsh Assembly Party, but they declined to attend. So the format for tonight's question and answer session is that we will put 6 questions to the candidates. They will all have a minute to answer, and all of those questions have come from you, our readers and viewers. So tonight we'll go to our first question, which is from Jill from Caerphilly.
I'm Jill, I'm a pensioner and I live in Caerphilly. So I'd like to ask the government, Caerphilly town centre is quite messy now. A lot of shops have closed down, a lot of shops are charity shops. What does the government intend to do there?
So Jill's question is about Caerphilly, but it's not just a problem affecting Caerphilly, it's something affecting lots of towns and cities across Wales. So first up, Cadan, what will your party do?
So absolutely, it's a problem that's blighting town centres, city centres right across Wales, and it's really something that we need to get to grips with in order to grow our economy again. And so as we recover from the coronavirus, what we as Welsh Lib Dems want to do is create a £500 million fund to help our high streets, our town and city centres thrive. That can go into stuff like renovation, it can go into making sure that we are making them places that people want to be in. We also need to make sure that we're looking at business rates, because that's a real big issue for shops in our town and city centres. So we want to freeze business rates over the course of the next 5 years, and whilst we look at replacing that entire system with something which is much fairer to our small businesses that are the backbone of town centres here in Wales.
Thanks, Cadan. Gwyn, over to you.
Yes, but I would echo what Cadan has said in many ways, because the answer is that there aren't that many answers. One thing I would say that for the centre of towns, most people in Aberystwyth here that I'm talking to, one of the big problems is parking. And in the countryside, of course, transport is a problem in general, and people want to come in and park near a shop. The out-of-town centres are doing quite well. They always have done, but we're seeing them closing because they're the big shops. I see lots of small, new artisan shops coming up where they sell on the internet and their shop window is pretty much their warehouse.
Yeah, Gwyn. Neil Hamilton, to you next, please.
Well, the COVID restrictions have dealt a devastating blow to our high street and to many small businesses, and it's difficult to see quite how we're going to recover from this, because we've had governments in all parts of the United Kingdom that have been determined to close down the entire British economy. But obviously business rates are an important element in reviving the high streets, but I think we have to recognise that online operations are going to be much more important in the future than in the past. So I think there may well be micro solutions to this, like reforming business rates and getting rid of over expensive parking policies and so on. But fundamentally, if people don't want to come out and buy in shops, then our town and city centres are not going to revive, and we're going to find ourselves in a completely different world. Obviously, I'm keen to support small businesses in every respect, and as UKIP is a party of small business people and entrepreneurs, then we have an overriding interest in this. But I don't think that we should fool ourselves to think that the world is going to be the same next year as it was the year before last, because it isn't.
Neil Hamilton, thank you very much. Jenkins from Reform UK.
Yeah, so the COVID pandemic's obviously been a travesty for many businesses. They've been closed down, but what it does offer, as well as we go through into the future, opportunities going to be less commuting. To say people going from South Wales to Bristol, there'll be opportunities. Not everybody can work effectively from home. So what Reform UK would look to do is rejuvenate the high street by bringing some local hubs together. Parking is clearly an issue. We would offer free parking and look to try and integrate that with an environmental approach as well, where with electricity coming on board, with more electric cars, we would get the local authority car parks as electricity hubs to charge your car as well and scrap the parking. Clearly, business rates are a problem. The biggest winner of the pandemic through Mark Drakeford closing a lot of the stores over the last year has been Amazon, the online store. So we would scrap business rates and use online taxes to pay for that. And the main thing is to keep these high streets going is we just need no more full-scale lockdowns. We can't keep closing business. So that's the critical thing. Keep businesses open, free parking, keep the local hubs with COVID coming in and scrapping business rates and looking at the environmental factor we can do as well.
Thanks, Jamie. Neil McEvoy from Propel.
We've got a new Welsh Economy Act that we want to bring in. We want to create 8 community cooperative banks in Wales to lend to local businesses and support local businesses. We want to see a Welsh stock exchange. We've got to get the Welsh economy moving. We've got billions of pounds worth of gas in the old mines. We want to access that gas and put people back to work. What we need to do is get the economy moving and not go back into lockdown. I think that is one of the crucial elements of what we're saying. In terms of the gas, we know that we can create £25 billion worth of economic activity. On top of that, what we also want is Welsh public money spent in Wales with Welsh companies. For every 1% spent in Wales, we're looking at 2,000 extra jobs. At the moment, less than 50% is spent with Welsh companies. So we can create 100,000 jobs within 5 years.
Thanks, Neil. And Amelia Womack from the Green Party, please.
It's not just COVID that's destroyed our high streets. Where I'm in Newport, it's clear that as a result of austerity measures, as a result of austerity and the financial crash, that our high streets were already being impacted by the failure of government decisions. It's clear that what we need to do is to regenerate our high streets, making sure that there is clear investment for small businesses, reduction of business rates, and tackling business rents as well. We want to open up a green transformation fund as well to ensure that businesses that are environmentally friendly are able to access loans and opportunities to bring their businesses to life, meaning that we're working to ensure that we're addressing some of the issues on our high streets, as well as ensuring that we're tackling the climate and ecological emergency. But at the same time, arts and culture are the lifebloods of our communities, alongside the other parts that our high streets form. And I think it's vital and important that what we talk about is community and what our communities bring beyond just shops alone. We are looking to invest in arts and culture, bring up opportunities for the future, and making sure that we are bringing small businesses as a powerful force on our high streets.
I think 4 other parties there, so Reform, Lib Dems, UKIP and the Greens, all suggest scrapping or freezing business rates. Can we ask Glwad and Propel, is that something that you both endorse or agree with? If we start with you, Gwyn.
Yes, definitely, for a period of time. And I think there needs to be a new system anyway. The local businesses have been dealt a heavier blow as a percentage than the big conglomerates that come in. And I see it as a local revival of local difficulties. There are plenty of entrepreneurs out there. It's amazing what stuff is being made in Wales and sold online. And what I'm saying is that these days you can use the shop more as a warehouse. People call in, click and collect, etc. I know a few in Abereiron, they do that now. People come on holiday or for the weekend. They've ordered online at home and they collect it from the shop and buy something else. They're doing very well.
Neil McEvoy, Neil McEvoy, do you agree freezing or scrapping business rates?
Well, what Propel is doing is standing on our contract with Wales. We've laid out what we want to do. We want to develop the theme of community banks. So if you have a community bank...
Sorry, Neil, just on business rates itself, is that something you just before we move on to the next question?
It's not in our contract. So what I'm here to do tonight is to talk about our contract. There are 10 laws we want to pass. I think
so it's not in your contract, okay?
No, it isn't. No.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to our second question. This is coming from Eve.
Hi, I'm Eve. I'm a student at Cardiff University. My question would be, what are your plans for tuition fees for now and in the future? We've paid £9,000 for an experience we haven't got with online learning and an education from our bedrooms.
That's a question from Eve. So first up to answer that one will be you, please, Gwyn, on behalf of the Glwad Party. Gwyn, are you okay to go first on that one?
I haven't heard the question, I'm afraid.
Oh, sorry. So Eve asked, what are your plans for tuition fees now and in the future? I think we'll come back to Gwyn in just a second. I know we were having a couple of internet problems. I'll move on to the next person. We'll come back to Gwyn. Neil Hamilton, if we can go to you.
Yeah, well, tuition fees were introduced as a consequence of the Blair government's target of 50% of 18-year-olds going to university. So there are clear public expenditure difficulties in making blanket promises to get rid of them. But UKIP's policy is that we should concentrate funding on the subjects where we can generate some economic return. So science, technology, engineering, medicine, in those areas, we would remit the tuition fees for students. But we simply can't fund a system where 50% of 18 to 21-year-olds are going to university, and the taxpayer will be able to pay for it. My day, of course, I was lucky. I didn't have to pay tuition fees. I even had a maintenance grant as a student. But in those days, only about 10% of 18 to 21-year-olds went to university. So again, I think politicians must be aware of making promises that they can't fulfill because the money's not there. Amelia said earlier on about austerity as being the problem that we've had, but ultimately, money doesn't grow on trees, although Rishi Sunak seems to think it does. But ultimately, all these bills will come home to be paid.
Thanks very much, Neil. Gwyn, if we've got you back, can we put that one to you now? So what are your party's plans for tuition?
Yes, I'm back. Thanks, Ruth. Tuition fees. There's something very grotesque about the way that they passed this law. People who were in Westminster, who had their fees all paid, they had grants, etc., to go to university, and then cancelling it out. And the Lib Dems have got a very bad record on this one. Ours is very clear. We want to subsidise tuition fees for Welsh students to go to Welsh universities. We think that this money that is going out, except for exceptional circumstances of a course that's in England not available in Wales, that makes sense, where people are going to England and they've been using Welsh money to do that. I've got a neighbour here whose son has gone to Maastricht because they can get tuition there for free, their education for free in Holland. This is mad.
Thanks, Gwyn. Next, it will be Jamie Jenkins from Reform UK.
Yeah, so I think one of the travesties, obviously, of the pandemic has been kind of students being blamed for a lot of kind of super spreaders events with regards to COVID, and they've had a hard deal. And I think the first thing we need to do, and we've been campaigning for, is to get some refund of some of the tuition fees that have been paid for the last year. Because in any walk of life, any service you buy, if you don't get the service that you paid for, you're entitled to some refund. So that would be one of the main things that we would look for now. You've got to look as well over the last year, a lot of the jobs that students would do to supplement their incomes in terms of a university, and some incomes there, have all been closed down as well. So there's the double hit they had there. Now, when I worked at the Office for National Statistics, I led a study looking at the number of graduates, because we've seen this huge explosion since Tony Blair pushed more people to go into university. And over half of people are going into jobs now that from graduates who didn't need a degree 20 years ago. So we need to look at the actual numbers of people going into university. And if you look at that, we can then look in terms of funding some of the core key skills that we need in our public services and perhaps fund those in regards to university. And then long term, the Reform Party's view on this is that there should be 0% interest on all the costs of going to university. That's including tuition fees and loans, because it's a scandal that these interest rates are going up and up and up, and the students are having a burden of debt into the future.
Thank you, Jamie. Next, Neil McEvoy from Propel.
Yeah, I feel very sorry for students, because I think they've had a massively raw deal. They went to university, as the questioner said, they've had lessons online. They've not been allowed out hardly. They've been facing a real hard lockdown, especially in the universities that students that I've heard from. And I think we need to commit not to going back into lockdown. I think that is important. There is certainly, I think, a really good case for refunds for these students. Overall, in terms of principle, I think that education is a right, not a privilege. I campaigned hard. I remember demonstrating back in 1988 when they were bringing in student loans. And I think in the longer term, certainly I'd like to see education free at the point of use to go to university. I don't think it's fair that our young people are saddled with such debt, and I think it's something that future governments need to address.
Thank you, Neil. Amelia Womack from the Green Party.
Thank you. Fundamentally, education is a right and shouldn't be about it being a privilege. So in the Green Party, we believe that there should be a free education, ensuring that everybody has the opportunities that they deserve. But when it comes to 2020 and 2021, these decisions, people have pursued their dreams and have been delivered, in some cases, a complete nightmare. Green scrutiny that has made quite a difference in education. In Scotland, where we have Greens elected, it's the Scottish Greens that have been campaigning for a rent waiver to ensure that young people and students aren't harmed financially as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Also, it's important that we do have some fees returned for the experience that young people have had this year. As you said, it's been a very stunted experience. And beyond that, it's clear that students and those who want to pursue education should have a better wealth of mental health support. It's clear that the students I've been talking to during the pandemic have been desperately looking for support of their experiences, and that there needs to be parity of mental and physical health, as well as making sure that we're investing in those mental health services.
Thanks, Amelia. And finally on this one, Cadan at Tomos from the Liberal Democrats.
So I think the important thing is that we make sure that higher education is available to everyone on the basis of their ability rather than their ability to pay. And I think what we have done, Kirsty Williams has been the education minister in Wales for the last 5 years, and what the reforms we've made to the student finance package has made it the most generous anywhere in Europe, making sure that we're paying students the equivalent of the living wage for the living costs that they're burdened with during university, which isn't something that other systems had taken into account. Actually, I went to university myself in 2012, the first year of £9,000 fees. I would much rather have gone to university under the system that Kirsty Williams has introduced, because it is so much fairer and so much better particularly for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. I think what we need to make sure now is that we keep on with that standard of support for students, making sure that we opened up university degrees making them more accessible to people from disadvantaged backgrounds, so that higher education isn't something that's out of the reach of so many here in Wales.
Thanks, Cadan. Cadan, can I just come back with you there? So Propel and Reform and the Greens have all sort of mentioned there that they may support some sort of compensation scheme for students affected this year. How do you feel about that? Where's your party position on it?
So absolutely, students have had a raw deal, and I wouldn't want to spend my years at university locked up in a bedroom. I think we're talking about two different things here around tuition fee reform, tuition fee refunds and rent refunds. I think for tuition fees, we need to recognise that universities have still been providing their course and providing their teaching, and the lecturers and university staff have had to go through a lot as well to be able to change the entire way they're teaching to adapt to online teaching. So I think that needs to be borne in mind. Around rent refunds, it's something that it's up to individual universities to do. But Kirsty, as Education Minister, did make an extra £10 million available to university to help with students' hardship, because recognising, as others said, that many will have lost jobs, many might be struggling with their rent payments because of the pandemic, and so that money has been given to universities to give out to those students who are experiencing hardship at the moment.
Thanks, Cadan. If we move on to question 3, this is from Jonathan Morgan from Aberdare.
My name is Jonathan Morgan, and I live in Aberdare. And my question is about waiting lists in Wales. In England, there are 58 million people. 388,000 of them are waiting a year or more for NHS treatment. In Wales, we have 3 million people, but 218,000 of these are waiting 9 months or more for NHS treatment. What do the parties intend to do to address this imbalance in waiting list?
So first on this one will be Neil Hamilton from UKIP, please.
Yeah, well, waiting lists in Wales have trebled in the people waiting more than 36 weeks. The 95% target of patients spending a maximum of 4 hours in A&E has never been met. Cancer waiting time targets have been missed for a decade. Target of patients waiting a maximum 26 weeks for treatment hasn't been met for 10 years. So this is not something which is just a product of the COVID pandemic. This is a systemic failure of the Welsh government to manage the health service properly. And this is, I think, endemic in Wales because of the nature of devolution, that, the Welsh government ostensibly has the power to control the health service, but because Wales is the poorest part of the United Kingdom, and we get a raw deal out of the Treasury funding from Whitehall, we can't afford to pay for the kinds of services that Wales needs, and they've been badly managed as well. 5 of the 7 health boards in Wales have been in special measures or targeted intervention in the last 5 years. Betsy Cadwaladr has only recently been removed from special measures in North Wales in the run-up to this election. So I'm afraid that the health service is a Cinderella project in Wales, because devolution denies Wales the means of financing the health service that we need, and we have a Welsh Labour government that is incompetent and incapable of managing it properly anyway.
Neil Hamilton, thank you very much. Next, Jamie Jenkins from Reform UK.
Yeah, so I think what COVID has identified is that when there's critical health needs, the government will fund these things. So in Wales, we spent £1.4 billion on the NHS to try and tackle with COVID. For the furlough schemes, cost us £2 billion over the last year. So you're talking over £3 billion has been spent now. The Wales Governance Centre has been looking at the figures on this, and at the moment, waiting lists are about over 500,000. We had the latest statistics out today on those. We've got over 250,000 people waiting more than half a year to start treatment. Now, the cost to get NHS waiting times back to pre-COVID levels is around 1 billion, just maybe slightly over 1 billion, at a higher estimate of that over the next 4 years. So Reform UK are committing now to fully fund the full £1 billion to get the NHS back to where it was pre-pandemic. Once we climb that part of the mountain, we were then able to get NHS waiting times back even below that, because they weren't very good before the COVID pandemic. So we found the money for COVID. It's a lot less to spend to actually fix the waiting list problem. And as we say, every life matters, not just the COVID lives. And that's our commitment, that we will ensure that the waiting times are tackled with the funding that's necessary.
Thanks, Jamie. Neil McEvoy from Propel, please.
Thanks. The very first line of our contract with Wales says that on the first day of a Propel-supported government in Wales, we will appoint an independent audit company to audit forensically the accounts of the Welsh government. We will be looking and examining any incidences of fraud, corruption, and waste. All money saved will be redirected to the NHS. What we also need to do, as I was saying earlier, is make sure we move out of lockdown and get the NHS working normally again, so that people get the operations, they get the appointments. And also, in terms of the NHS, what we need to be looking at are preventative measures. So we need to reopen gyms, and we need to reclassify gyms as essential service providers, because they will improve people's health, therefore reducing the burden on the NHS in the longer term.
Thanks, Neil. Amelia from the Green Party, over to you, please.
Such a vital question, and I think it's not just in doctor surgeries. Even I feel like the waiting times for appointments are frustrating for so many people. As Greens, we believe that we should be working community first in terms of how we work with our NHS, but just to tackle waiting times as a whole, when you're looking at managing quite a dynamic system, really, when it comes to waiting times, you need to be managing both the demand and also making sure that you're managing the capacity. So as was mentioned before, reducing the demand is how you ensure that there are effectively other early intervention to ensure that people's health needs are being met as soon as possible. We know that waiting times actually cause longer problems and mean that people's health deteriorates, causing effectively a more expensive way of treatment. And we tackle the capacity issue. You need to increase clinical supply, and I think that ensuring that we have an NHS that works for everyone in the country is going to happen as a result of having a fully funded NHS that's in public hands, not sold off to private profit, and making sure that we're bringing that into community so that people can easily access the healthcare that they need as close to their homes as possible.
Thanks, Amelia. Cadan from the Lib Dems, over to you.
So, obviously, this, as the questioner said, waiting times were an issue even before the pandemic, but they've very much been thrown into a bit of chaos as a result. And I know that things are getting slowly back into place, but not everything is back there. I've got a heart condition I've not had a checkup for since before the pandemic, whereas I'm meant to have one every year. So there's clearly stuff still not happening in the right way. I think what we need to do as a matter of urgency as we start to get to grips with the coronavirus is agree between workforces and patients a range of recovery plans for the NHS and for social care, so people who have had their care delayed or impacted throughout the pandemic are supported as quickly as possible. And making sure that we've got specific approaches for conditions such as cancer as well to make sure that they are properly supported. There's a lot of things that you can do to speed up our healthcare, through better funding of GPs and making sure that we're introducing single patient health records and e-prescribing to speed up some of the stuff through the sort of in the back office that causes a lot of delays. But the key thing I want to talk about is around mental health. I think that the pandemic has shown just how much of an issue mental health is. So we, as Welsh Lib Dems, want to create a truly 24/7 mental health care service so that everyone can get that vital support when they need it. And that's going to be one of our priorities moving forward.
Thanks, Cadan. And finally on this question, Gwyn from Glwad.
A lot of politicians are talking about lack of funds. They've just wasted 32 billion on the track and trace, which has been ditched. It's unbelievable. There's a tsunami coming through of problems. I've got a son who's got cancer at the moment, and he's been looked after very well. If I was in trouble, I'm very happy with the NHS system locally here in Aberystwyth, and I have been using it. But the point is that there is this numbers. It's the numbers that are coming through now is the problem. And there's a private sector out there which is underused. There are operation facilities that are only used X amount of hours. Jerry Robinson, he said if this was a car plant, it'd be used 24 hours a day. If you've got the staff, use it. It is available there. We believe in community. We believe in decentralising what Labour have done, and cottage hospitals were one of the best things going.
Thank you, Gwyn. Amelia, can I just come back to you there? Your manifesto doesn't mention waiting times at all, and yet today's figures show that there's 500,000 people in Wales on waiting lists. Have you got the wrong priority there? I think Amelia's internet may have gone. I'll go back to. Oh no, you're back, Amelia, are you?
I've just come back. Sorry, that was time for free. I got as far as don't have waiting times in my manifesto.
Yeah, waiting times isn't in your manifesto, and yet there's 500,000 people now on waiting lists in Wales. Is your party prioritised wrong there?
Politics is all about priorities, but it's also when we're talking about investment into the NHS, obviously these are issues that we want to tackle, because that will ensure that, as I said, we'll be reducing the demand and also increasing the clinical supply, while making sure that doctors and nurses get the support that they deserve during a really tough time. I think that when it comes to waiting times, so it's not in the manifesto. I would highlight that, as a smaller party, our manifesto is effectively brought together by a small group of people, unlike other bigger parties. And what we're trying to focus on is those big, important ideas to make sure that we have clear scrutiny. When we, as I said,
waiting times is a big and important issue. 500,000 people on it is a
and that's where the scrutiny is so vital and important. We've got a Labour government who have been in government for more than 20 years, and what they need to be done is to be held to account by parties that are able to ensure that they are being scrutinised from the outside, not continue to be scrutinised from those who have been elected time and time again, and yet have failed things like waiting times time and time again.
Okay, thanks very much, Amelia. We're going to go to the next question now, which I'm going to read rather than a video. This is from Rachel from Cumbraen. She asks, will your party support and enforce COVID vaccination certificates or passports within Wales? So first to answer this one is Jamie Jenkins from Reform UK.
Yeah, so if anybody's been following me on Twitter for the last month, we vehemently oppose this, and it's good to see that the church leaders are following on this. This is quite discriminatory to have a vaccine passport. We're not opposed to vaccines. We think vaccines are the personal choice of individuals. And the vaccine effort has actually been immense with regard to the NHS staff, the procurement of it, the volunteers working with the NHS staff, and that's kind of got COVID death rates in Wales now below average levels for the time of year. So that's great, but we vehemently oppose them. And in particular, as we start to see the economy starting to reopen, well belatedly, there's going to be some people who are younger at the back of the queue, for example, with vaccines, who won't actually have a passport to go to the pubs. So we vehemently oppose any vaccine passports domestically. They serve no purpose whatsoever. And on top of that, we vehemently oppose masks in class as well. And those are our two key pledges with regards to COVID and the kind of the shambles that Mark Drakeford's handling the pandemic at the moment.
Thanks, Jamie. Neil McEvoy from Propel, please.
Yeah, Propel is totally opposed to vaccine passports. The vaccine is a choice, and for me, it's a thin end of a wedge, because if you look at the software behind these passports, they're essentially data passports. So in the not too distant future, if there's a vaccine passport, there may be other kinds of data loaded onto that passport. And if you look at the experience that people have in places like China, I think that there are huge issues with civil liberties here. So we're completely opposed to a vaccine passport. Taking the vaccine is a matter of choice. And if somebody is in their early 20s, extremely fit, then you really have to question the wisdom of them having to have a vaccine. And I think it's personal choice, and we certainly should not have passports.
Thank you, Neil. Amelia from the Green Party, please.
I mean, we already have proof of vaccine for other points like yellow fever and hepatitis, which is already a requirement for international travel. I think that it's important to have passports to ensure that we're effectively decreasing transmission rates and risk, both here in the UK and abroad. I think that it's important, though, that we don't have, we wouldn't support any kind of no jab, no job policy. And also we need to be ensuring that we are basically tackling some of the inequalities that we have, that mean that some people don't want to take the vaccine, or there may be reasons why they're unable to, and ensure that we're tackling some of those inequalities in different communities, like the BME community.
Thanks, Amelia. Cadan for the Lib Dems, please.
So as Liberal Democrats, we have been quite strongly opposed to the idea of any vaccine certification or passports in order to get into services or to venues. I think that they're illiberal and they're unworkable, and they're costly, actually, and fairly expensive. But I think the the main thing here is that I'm not entirely sure exactly what problem they're trying to solve. I think they're based on a bit of a misunderstanding about how the vaccine works. I've had my first dose of the vaccine, very glad to have it, and I would encourage everyone to do it as well. But once I've been vaccinated, it doesn't stop me from catching the virus. It doesn't stop me from spreading the virus. All it does is stop me from getting, or hopefully stop me from getting ill from the virus and to the point where I would need to be hospitalized. So having a group of people, even if they have been vaccinated, in close proximity to one another isn't necessarily going to stop the virus from spreading, isn't going to stop it from causing its issues in the future, mutating and getting to a point perhaps where we might need to all be revaccinated again. So as a means to actually solving the problem that we have of lockdowns and continued lockdowns, I don't see how vaccine passports actually do that job either. So they're illiberal, they're costly, and frankly I don't think they're going to work.
Thanks, Cadan. Gwyn Wigley Evans from Glwad, please.
Well, we obviously, when we made our policies, we didn't think of this situation way back. So we're for vaccines, but we're not for the passport. That's for sure, as has been said. And just because you have the vaccine, as Cadan was saying, I agree with him entirely. It doesn't mean that you are immune to the whole thing. It doesn't mean you cannot get it. It doesn't mean you can't spread it. And because you have a passport, I can see it now. There's some cunning soul somewhere. There will be fake passports, obviously, being made, which doesn't help the situation. It's terrible. But the travel side, as we were talking about, as the passport itself, is I'd like to make sure that it would be both ways. Because there are people still coming into the country, and we're not monitoring them at all. But if you try and go somewhere else, as I wish to do for work, I find it very, very difficult, almost impossible.
Thank you, Gwyn. Neil Hamilton, please.
UKIP completely opposes any compulsory vaccine passports or certificates. As has already been said, the vaccine doesn't prevent you from contracting the disease and doesn't prevent you from transmitting it. So the whole thing is pointless. But that's true of so many of the restrictions which have been introduced as part of the COVID pandemic. There's been no relationship between the costs that are imposed and the benefits which are supposed to flow from them. This is a disease largely of old people and people with underlying health conditions. It doesn't really matter whether you get the disease if you're not going to suffer any severe symptoms. And the complete failure of governments in all parts of the United Kingdom to devise a policy which takes account of that fundamental reality has imposed massive costs upon us, not just in financial terms, but also in health terms. The operations that haven't been carried out, the diagnoses that have not been made, the conditions that people have contracted, which are in many ways just as severe or perhaps even more severe than COVID itself. This has been a sledgehammer to miss a nut in so many ways, and UKIP has opposed. I've voted against every single one of the regulations that's been introduced because they do not relate costs to benefits, and there's no proper risk assessment so that you can't evaluate in rational terms whether what you're doing in imposing laws upon people restricting their activities has any measurable benefit. So no,
Thank you, Neil.
We are completely.
Can I just say, Neil, people have lost friends and family during this pandemic, and to say that this is just a disease of the old is a really thoughtless way to be conducting in a debate like this, where people are going through grief. And you know, I appreciate that you have your own opinion, but I think that you should be respectful of people's experiences throughout a global pandemic.
Well, as somebody who's 72,
Amelia. Okay, Neil.
Could I reply to that?
Yeah.
As somebody who is 72 years old and is clinically vulnerable, I'm well aware of the dangers of this disease. But the facts of the matter are that overwhelmingly those who have suffered severe symptoms and those who have died are overwhelmingly in the age groups over 65. And every policy prescription has to have some kind of risk versus benefit evaluation. So of course I don't underestimate the tragedies of individual cases of people who die from COVID or suffer very severe symptoms. But ultimately, you can't apply a lockdown policy forevermore just because people get a disease, because that has costs attached to it too. And the Green Party seems to be completely unaware of this, let alone.
Okay, Neil, thank you very much. We'll leave that there. You both had a chance there, Amelia. We'll we'll move on from there.
In life, you don't put a cost on life, and you don't put a cost on age either.
Okay, Amelia, if we can both leave it there, I understand.
Lockdown is
I completely understand that tensions are high with everyone. If we can leave that one there and move on. I was just about to say that was a very rare moment that there's quite a lot of agreement on that answer, but that serves me right for thinking that. Jamie, can I just come back to you quickly on that point about certificate? Your party wants to end lockdowns and get society moving again straight away. Do you not see any scope that something like that would be a quicker way of doing that?
Well, I think if you look at the vaccine rollout, we've seen deaths now in Wales are currently below average levels for the time of year. There's no evidence. If you take Mark Drakeford's or the Welsh Government's restriction plan that they published last December, before we even had a vaccine rollout, all the metrics would have had the economy open a long time ago. So I don't think the vaccine is part of the COVID answer, because the vaccine came after Mark Drakeford published his own metrics from his expert advisory group in terms of what we were doing. So the vaccine has sped things up as far as I'm concerned. And the fact that the Welsh Government and Mark Drakeford has slowed things down is an absolute travesty. And I think there needs to be people have talked about an inquiry at the UK level. There needs to be a full-scale inquiry of Mark Drakeford and Vaughan Gething's handling of this pandemic, because not only we've had the highest death rate from COVID in this country of all the 4 nations. We've had huge effects in the valleys as well. And Mark Drakeford and Vaughan Gething have been able to go on kind of doing the weekly briefings every other day with a propaganda tool where they've actually gone on and actually given the false information. So we did a full-scale inquiry. I don't think a vaccine passport is going to fix that. And we need to move on, get the economy going, and basically get young people and the middle-aged people, all those business owners, back into work.
Thanks, Jamie. So we can move on to question 5, please. That's from Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly from Porth, and I own a wedding business called Crafty Bunnies. I haven't worked properly for over a year now. Most of this year's weddings have already postponed to next year because 15, 30 or even 50 guests in a wedding isn't enough for couples to have the day they planned. The couples who are going ahead this year are scaling back their days and cancelling their suppliers. Most other businesses will start earning as soon as they come out of lockdown. However, we won't, as we rely on the permitting of large gatherings. Can you provide my couples with a clear dated plan of when they can expect to see numbers dramatically increase to more than 50, and what future support will be available from the Welsh Government for businesses like mine who could potentially be without work for the next 12 months if this year's wedding season is lost?
So first up, that's Kelly's talking, I think, on behalf of lots of business owners there, that it's not going to be a quick fix for lots of them. So we want to know what your party's promising for businesses about the future after lockdown, and if there's a third wave, what you'll do and how long you'll continue to help them. Neil McEvoy, you first, please, for Propel.
I think we should already be out of lockdown. We need to get out of lockdown as soon as possible. And what we need to do as well is look at the furlough scheme and renegotiate the furlough scheme to pay people who can go to work and who can get their businesses working again. I think the questioner is a prime example of people who should be helped under those circumstances. I think I'm really worried that this government is going to take us back into another lockdown, which is going to have huge costs. According to the government's own figures, some of the damage will be irreversible already. So it's, I think we need to get away from this idea that lockdown is a solution and is the only way forward. What we need is a middle way, and that's what Propel is proposing. We need to carry on with social distancing measures, which actually work. The more extreme measures of lockdown, you look at most studies around the world, they have very little effect. And I'll quote you Stanford University, check their study out. That lockdown, any further lockdown will be disastrous. Let's get out as soon as possible and let's get people back to work.
Thank you, Neil. Next will be Amelia for the Green Party, please.
It's been an incredibly tough time for so many people. And I think that safety net that we need for business owners, we haven't seen that. I think one of the things that really strikes me about this pandemic was there was a warning that came from China, a warning that came from Europe, yet we didn't get our ducks in a row in time, taking advice of the science. Obviously, the WHO said test, yet we haven't even got to that point properly yet. And we need to be making sure that we are taking that advice and applying it into our communities. As Greens, what we want to do is ensure that we're working towards things like a universal basic income, so that we can ensure that every single person has the basic amount of money to ensure that they've got food on their table and a roof over their heads, meaning that we can work to ensure that people have a stable income, regardless of what's happening in the UK economy. I think that lockdowns have been tough, and those businesses that have shouldered that burden should be supported through the government.
Thanks, Amelia. Next up is Cadan from the Welsh Lib Dems.
So these have been really, really difficult times, and I definitely don't envy the position that the government ministers have been in trying to make the decisions based on the data they have in front of them. I don't think we're in a position now to sort of give or any of the parties here are in a position to give a dated timeline for specific things like that, because a lot of it depends on looking at the data and seeing how the virus is progressing, the spread is progressing, and making sure that the right decisions are made at the right time. And while we as Lib Dems within government and obviously outside of it have had quibbles with the government in some of the specific decisions they've made, such as the recent restrictions allowing supermarkets to sell non-essential items before non-essential retailers could reopen. That was one of the things that I personally spoke out against as well. I think it's hard to quantify that and give that a specific date. I think the one thing I would say, though, is that for however long that lockdowns need to continue, and lockdowns absolutely do have a place in tackling the virus, for however long they need to continue, we need to make sure that the support is there for the businesses that are forced to close as a result. So as we move forward to perhaps a more flexible, a more specific targeted approach to the virus, having that specific targeted approach for the business affected is vital as well.
Cadan, thank you very much. Gwyn from Glwad, please.
I think you'll find things have changed and they can't go back. I mean, during the Second World War, because of the war, things came forward very quickly, like radar. I think COVID has done that with Zoom, for instance. I normally travel the world, and I haven't been for a year and a half, and I've carried on my business. I think businesses will adapt. Especially smaller businesses. They're very clever at doing new things. So the future is looking different to the old one. We don't want to go back to the same old system. We've asked for an impact assessment for lockdown, for any good that it's doing and any damage that it's doing. That would be our starting point. And on the universal income part that was mentioned, we called it citizens' income. It's a similar thing, but the one thing that is missing, that all the other parties have jumped on the bandwagon on this one, is it has to be linked to the tax system. Otherwise, it does not work. We think it's a very good thing, and it should be developed, and we would want it developed very quickly. It would be very good for businesses instead of the furlough scheme. Just because the furlough scheme has been there, many parties have jumped on it thinking, oh, it's a good thing. That is a fad. We've actually costed it out. We've got an economist behind it, a Welsh economist in Swansea, and it works.
Thank you, Gwyn. Neil Hamilton.
Well, the Welsh government, like the UK government, has declared war on the Welsh economy and the UK economy. The lockdown is the source of many people's business problems, and lifting it as soon as possible is absolutely essential. The full absurdity of the current restrictions were on display in St George's Chapel in Windsor for the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, where everybody was social distanced in a vast space, and then immediately, as soon as the service was over, congregated together and huddled as they went to the committal service. Governments have created a climate of fear which is totally unjustified, and the consequences of the damage that their policies has created will be with us for a long, long time to come. But the best way to get businesses up and running again is to get rid of the legal restrictions which have been making it impossible to do business. For a wedding and events business, you can't do that by Zoom, and many other businesses as well. Ultimately, it's freedom which is going to bring revival to the businesses that have been able to survive the lockdown. And what we have to recognise is that the government has been a big part of the problem, not the solution.
Thanks, Neil. Jamie Jenkins from Reform UK.
Yes, so I think the main thing we need to focus on, these are real people we're talking about, real businesses, and I think all the contributor is asking for was a kind of a roadmap, and what are you going to do to support this? Well, the Lib Dem spokesman just now was talking about looking at the data, and I don't think there's many people in Wales who've been looking at the data more than me since last March, and it's quite clear that the data at the moment in Wales would have the economy far more open than what it should be. We've clearly seen, the number of excess deaths, and every death that we've seen which was premature, we need to pause and think of those families that have lost loved ones. But at the moment, if you vote for a Welsh Labour government, we're just going to have more dither and delay. She wants to know when her business is going to open. Well, we're spending £150 million a month on the furlough scheme, and some of that money will probably go into the business for the wedding owners. That money means that we're paying taxpayers' money to these businesses. We're not generating any money from the economy. That then in turn has an impact on the health system. So let's look at the facts. We've got 2/3 of the adult population have had the vaccine. So we've got the antibodies in most of the adults at the moment. People are talking about a third wave of cases. Well, if the vaccine doesn't work for a third wave, then we need to ask for a refund from AstraZeneca and Pfizer, because clearly the vaccine isn't going to work, but all the evidence is showing that it is reducing the cases. And basically what we need is a roadmap out of lockdown, and basically never go back into another full-scale lockdown again. And that's what the Reform Party is saying. I just think with Mark Drakeford, you look at the roadmap, I think he's got lost on the M4 Relief Road roadmap that Carwyn Jones promised us at the last election, which obviously...
Okay, Jamie, thank you very much. Sorry, your time was up there, I'm afraid. We gave you a little extra as well. Next, that was the last of that question, sorry. If I can come back to Neil Hamilton or something you said there, Neil. You didn't say, you said earlier you were the party of small business. You didn't actually give Kelly an answer. Will you give us an idea of a policy that you think will help business owners like her in the future?
Well, I think I did say that the only way that businesses like hers are going to revive is by getting rid of the restrictions which are currently making it impossible for them to do business. If you run a wedding and events business, obviously you need to have people purchasing your services. If you can't have more than 30 people at a wedding ceremony, then obviously it's very difficult for a business.
So your answer is ending lockdown. That's what you think will do the best for a business like that.
Absolutely the key to it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And our final question tonight is from Michael Murphy from Cardiff.
If you could do just one thing to make Wales a better place to live in, what would it be?
Thank you, Michael. That's that helpful question. Amelia, you first.
I didn't hear the question.
I would implement a Green New Deal, which would tackle vast inequalities that we have across Wales, provide tens of thousands of new jobs while ensuring that we stay below 1.5 degrees of warming, and ensure that we are stopping the nature crisis as well. A Green New Deal is an opportunity to really invest in the people of Wales and ensure that we are tackling the biggest issues of our time. It's clear that what we want after the coronavirus isn't going to be the same as what we wanted before. And with the biggest catastrophe on the horizon being climate change, we can ensure that we build out of this a system that's fit for today and fit for the future, and ensures supporting the rights of future generations.
Amelia Womack for the Green Party, thank you very much. Cadan Tomos from the Lib Dems, please.
So in this Senedd election, the Welsh Lib Dems have been quite clear that we want to put our recovery first. But I think there can't be any kind of recovery from this pandemic if it's not a green one. So we have been quite clear and quite bold in saying that we want to create a package of investment of £1 billion per year that goes towards fighting the climate emergency. And I've chosen this because I think it's so wide encompassing. It's not only helping communities tackle the effects of the climate emergency that we're seeing, of flooding increasing in many parts of Wales, but it will also stimulate our economy and create new green jobs, the right sort of jobs right across Wales in innovative new green technologies. It will help homeowners because we can make sure that we're investing in home energy efficiency, cut people's energy bills as well, and help save the average homeowner £500 a year, but also protecting our environment for future generations. As a young person, climate change is one of the things that I worry about most, and I'm glad that we as Welsh Liberal Democrats are quite clear that we want to make tackling it one of our main priorities going forward.
Diolch, Cadan. Gwyn Wigley Evans from Glwad, please.
We've got lots of policies, and they're all being put into 3 columns of what the problems are, what the Senedd could do, and what an independent Wales could do. But I think if I have to pick one of them out, it's got to be our revolutionary idea of the citizens' income. And as I said before, it's got to, because that would get rid of so many anomalies. It would be amazing. The citizens' income would give everybody an income, and they could do what they like with it. Because then, instead of this nonsense of having to work 16 hours, and it's easier to stay at home and collect the dole and go to work, and these ridiculous situations, be starving, that's for sure. It shouldn't be in this day and age, and they could take a job, they could start their own business, and we believe that that is the bottom-up type of approach of small businesses, small shops, innovation, entrepreneurs is the way forward.
Diolch, Gwyn. Neil Hamilton from UKIP, please.
Well, Wales's greatest problem is poverty. You know, Wales is the poorest part of the United Kingdom, and it's poorer relative to the rest of the UK than it was 22 years ago when devolution was introduced. So scrapping the Senedd is our main policy in this election, because devolution has failed, and it's bound to fail, because the Welsh tax base is too small to support the government services that have to be provided in Wales. And as far as the Westminster government is concerned, a government in Cardiff means out of sight, out of mind, and a Tory government at Westminster simply isn't going to give a Welsh Labour government in Cardiff the money to do the job, especially as the Welsh Labour government in Cardiff has been much more interested in grandstanding on issues like Brexit, trying to make themselves a nuisance to the Westminster government, rather than trying to do what the DUP in Northern Ireland have done, which is to use their votes in the House of Commons in order to get more money for the Northern Ireland. So this ultimately is, for the long term, the biggest possible benefit that we're offering to Wales, is scrapping the Senedd and using Wales's political resources in order to get the kind of government for Wales that we need.
Thank you, Neil. Neil Jenkins from UK.
Yeah, so obviously for most people in Wales, the most important things are health and kind of economic kind of factors like incomes and things. But we've talked a lot about those. So I think what I think would be really good for the people of Wales is to sort out kind of the Senedd. Now, politicians need to remember that we are elected, if we are elected, to represent the people, not the people are there to work for us. And one thing we would do is ensure there's 2 referendums in the next parliament, one on abolishing the Welsh Senedd and one on independence. And the Reform Party's position clearly is that there's no economic plan, clear economic plan from Plaid Cymru for independence. We're stronger in the union, so we would actively campaign to be a strong voice within the United Kingdom. And the argument against abolish, and I can see abolish haven't turned up tonight, and probably because that's the only policy they have. The argument against abolish, well, if your football team's struggling to win matches, or the Welsh rugby team is, you don't say let's get rid of Wales out of the Six Nations. You change the actual players and the managers. So we think we should reform the Senedd, get better politicians there. And remember, you know, the Reform Party have rebranded from the Brexit Party. We won the European elections. We need to clearly end these divisive arguments about independence and abolish, because you can see now we've had the Brexit argument, we've had the referendum, things have been decided, and we've moved on from that onto the next chapter. And that's what Reform want to do, is end the divisive arguments in Wales about politics.
Thanks, Jamie. And finally, Neil McEvoy from Propel.
Thanks. I would like to implement Propel's Children Before Profit Act. There are so many things wrong with the care sector in Wales, and Propel is proposing to outlaw profiteering from looked after children. What we also want to do is safely reduce the number of children in care, safely reduce the number of children who are adopted. We want to keep families together. We want early intervention so that children do not have to say goodbye to their parents and don't have to say goodbye to their brothers and sisters. I mean, nothing has changed. I spoke to a man last night who was in care as a child, and in 40 years, nothing has changed. There are children alleging abuse in care, not being listened to. They don't even figure in the news. And if I could do anything in Wales, it would be to introduce a Children Before Profit Act and put our kids first.
Thank you all. So that's it. We hope that tonight has given you some help in deciding who to vote for. We'd like to thank everyone that joined us for tonight's debate. Wales Online's next live event ahead of the election will be on May 4th, when we'll be joined by the three men, one of whom will most likely become the First Minister on May 6th. Those people are Mark Drakeford from Labour, Plaid Cymru's Adam Price, and Conservative Group Leader Andrew R.T. Davis. So thank you again to tonight's candidates. Best of luck to all of you, and good luck voting.